Hi, I'm Luke Gilfillan. Welcome to the Lounge with Luke Gilfillan. Hello and welcome to the Lounge with Luke Gilfillan. Today we're going to be going over everything that has happened in Iran over the past few months, every major event that's happened in Iran over the past few months. Starting out, we're going to go over the protests over originally over gas prices in Iran that started in late November. This is from actually, most of everything I'm going to read is from the New York Times. There's going to be one statement from the Pentagon and one quick Wikipedia reference to describe the Hezbollah branch, Iraqi branch of Hezbollah. Iran has experienced, this is according to Farnaz Fasihi and Rick Gladstone from the New York Times. Iran has experienced, this was published on December 1st, so this is from like 20 plus days ago. Iran is experiencing its deadliest political unrest since the Islamic Revolution 40 years ago, with at least 180 people killed and possibly hundreds more. It ended up being 1,500, but this article was never updated. And possibly hundreds more, as angry protests have been smothered in a government crackdown of unbridled force. It began 2 weeks ago with an abrupt increase of at least 50% in gasoline prices within 72 hours. Outraged demonstrators in cities large and small were calling for an end to the Islamic Republic's government and the downfall of its leaders. In many places, security forces responded by opening fire on unarmed protesters, largely unemployed or low-income young men between the ages of 19 and 26, according to witness accounts and videos. In the southwest city of Mashhad alone, witnesses and medical personnel said the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps members surrounded, shot, and killed 40 to 100 demonstrators, mostly unarmed young men, in a march where they had sought refuge. The recent use of lethal force against people throughout the country is unprecedented, even for the Islamic Republic and its record of violence, says Omid Memarin, the deputy director at the Center of Human Rights in Iran, a New York-based group. Altogether, from 180 to 450 people and possibly more were killed in 4 days of intense violence after the gasoline prices increased was announced on November 18th, with at least 2,000 wounded and 7,000 detained. So that are incredible numbers, which rose in the days following the publishment of the article. So essentially, what Iran has been dealing with for the past 2 months has been political turmoil, and their leaders are certainly scared of a potential uprising as protesters across the countries are, essentially rioting. There are images of like burned banks that are like shown along with this article is a burned gas station. So this has Iran's leadership panicking and looking for something to distract with. So the United States airstrikes 24 members of an Iranian-backed militia. That militia is named Kataib Hezbollah, which is not necessarily connected to the Hezbollah branch, the more well-known Hezbollah branch in Lebanon, but both are funded by Iraq and are Shia paramilitary groups. So this Kataib Hezbollah, or Hezbollah Brigades, is an Iraqi Shia militia group, which is part of the popular mobilization forces that is supported by Iran. Since some listeners may not know, there are these two groups of Muslim denominations, Shia and Sunni. Sunni tends to make up the like western part of the Middle East, and Shia tends to be like Iran and its neighbors. I believe the divide is over who should essentially be the leader of Islam. I believe Shia, but I might be wrong. It might be the other way around. Shia believes that Muhammad's son is the inheritor of the religious leadership, while the others, I'm not exactly sure what they believe. It has been active in the Iraqi Civil War and the Syrian Civil War. During the Iraq War, the group fought against coalition occupation forces. The group was commanded by Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis until he was killed in a U.S. airstrike in Baghdad on the 3rd of January 2020. So we'll get to that later, but the leader of this group was also killed along with the more notable general. Protesters broke. Okay, this is according to Ben Hubbard, Alyssa J. Rubin, and Fahil Hassan. This was published on December 31st, 2019. So I believe it was the Tuesday, last Tuesday. Protesters broke into the heavily guarded compound of the United States Embassy in Baghdad on Tuesday and set fires inside in anger over American airstrikes that killed 24 members of an Iranian-backed militia over the weekend. The men did not enter the main embassy buildings and later withdrew from the compound, joining thousands of protesters and militia fighters outside chanting "Death to America," throwing rocks, covering the walls with graffiti, and demanding that the United States withdraw its forces from Iraq. So this was a very tense situation as literally thousands of protesters surrounded this embassy, our American embassy, which is by international law American soil, and were chanting "Death to America." So I'm not sure um, that there's any doubt that these protesters were clearly violent. Most of them were military-aged young males. So, and they were mostly members of militia groups, particularly the Kataib Hezbollah, which we talked about briefly. So these were, I'm sure there were a lot of protesters in there, but a lot of them were known terrorists. The situation remained combustible, with the crowd vowing to camp indefinitely outside the sprawling compound, the world's largest embassy. I did not know that. Their ability to storm the most heavily guarded zone in Baghdad suggested that they had received at least tacit permission from Iraqi security officials sympathetic to their demands. As this was all going on, of course, President Trump was demanding that Iraqi security officials disperse the protests and protect the embassy, but unfortunately, most of the Iraqi security officials were sympathetic to the terrorist cause. There are like images of, I might, I'm going to put up this image now. There's a bunch of, you can see all military aged men, some of them in military uniforms, and you can see some of them are actually Iraqi security forces. You can see them by their red caps. They're breaking into that clearly bulletproof glass window. There's a lot of fire going on. They're all around just storming this massive compound, using a plumbing pipe to break the embassy's windows. President Trump, faced with scenes of unfolding chaos in an American embassy, lashed out at Iran, which he blamed for the protest. And Iran is partially definitely to blame for the protests. These protests were, of course, instigated by that airstrike, which killed those 24 terrorists. So, in a response to that, these this embassy siege and a potential murder of all the people inside the embassy, the Pentagon released this statement after airstriking one of Iran's top generals. I'm going to read it because that's what I think. This was released on January 2nd, 2020. At the direction of the president, the U.S. military has taken decisive action to protect U.S. personnel abroad by killing Qasim Soleimani, head of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Quds Force, a U.S. designated foreign terrorist organization. General Soleimani was actively developing plans to attack American diplomats and service members in Iraq and throughout the region. General Soleimani and his Quds Force were responsible for the deaths of hundreds of American and coalition service members and the wounding of thousands more. He'd orchestrated attacks on coalition bases in Iraq over the last 7 months, including the attack on December 27th, culminating in the death and wounding of additional American and Iraqi personnel. General Soleimani also approved the attacks on the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad that took place this week. The strike was aimed at deterring future Iranian attack plans. The United States will continue to take all necessary action to protect our people and our interests whenever they are around. So, I forgot to mention that there was a U.S. contractor that was in a Iraqi base that was murdered by a group of Iranian-backed militia members in Iraq, which prompted the airstrike of these 24 terrorists, which then prompted the embassy siege, which in turn led to the airstrike of General Soleimani. So that was the extent of the initial statement from the Pentagon. So the Pentagon obviously releases the statement, and then this is where the conflict sort of reaches the boiling point. A comparison that is being drawn is to what happened here is if Iran were to kill Mike Pompeo, or who's our Secretary of State. This general was widely known to be like very high in the Iranian chain of power. A lot of people thought he would be second to the role of the Ayatollah, or Iran's supreme leader. Um, so obviously, the Iranian leadership is taken aback by this position, and it's a clear escalation as to what is happening in the region at the time. So um, I'm gonna read from Karen Zrayek at New York Times. General Soleimani was Iran's most powerful security and intelligence commander. He was the longtime leader of its Revolutionary Guards Quds Force, the foreign-facing branch of the country's powerful security apparatus. He worked closely with Iraqi and Lebanese allies, nurturing proxy forces to form a Shiite axis of power throughout the region. His profile rose amid the fight to prop up Bashar al-Assad of Syria, and later the fight against the Islamic State. He had already been designated as a terrorist by the United States and Israel, but many in Iran lauded him as a hero, as, of course, you would if you were an Iranian. The drone strike also killed several officials from Iraqi militias, including the Kataib Hezbollah, the leader of Kataib Hezbollah, backed by Iran. Among them were the leader of that militia, a top commander of the popular Muslim, Mohammad Reza Jabri. Mr. Al-Muhandis was a lifelong ally of Iran, and he rose to prominence fighting the Islamic State. So I'm going to put up a graphic of the map where the airstrike happened. It was near the Baghdad airport, and the embassy is just across the city. So the Pentagon, of course, I read in that statement, took the step because they were under the belief that General Soleimani was actively developing plans to attack American diplomats and service members in Iraq and throughout the region. They thought that he was developing a plan to siege the embassy and kill diplomats and service members inside of the embassy. So, of course, time was limited in the situation, and it might have been a necessary step in order to prevent an attack on the embassy. But General Soleimani was very, very influential in Iraqi government, and certainly this is a escalation that has to be well thought out, because the last thing we want is a war with a country with 82 million people, and a well, they don't have a powerful military. But that being said, you don't want a war. No one really wants war, and if it's really unnecessary, which it doesn't seem to be right now, it doesn't seem, as far as we know, they might have information that we don't as the public, but a war that doesn't need to happen should not happen. Following the airstrike, Iraqi lawmakers voted on Sunday to require the United States government to end the presence of American troops in the country after the United States ordered the killing of Iranian leader of the elite Quds Force, Major General Qasem Soleimani, on Iraqi soil. So the airstrike was legal because the Iraqi government had given the United States broad jurisdiction to conduct military exercises in Iraq until they revoked it on Sunday. Well, they haven't gone through it yet because the prime minister still needs to sign it, but he was the one that drafted the bill, so he's definitely going to sign it. So the airstrike was legal at the time under international law, despite some UN members saying that it was probably illegal because they can't take any definite terms as they are UN members without any power. It would end the mission approved in 2014 that gave the United States the explicit task of helping Iraqi forces to fight the Islamic State. That agreement gave the Americans substantial latitude to launch attacks and use Iraqi airspace, but the measure would leave in place the Strategic Framework Agreement, which allows a American troop presence in Iraq in some form. Now, I don't have a statement from the Pentagon, but I believe I did read a statement saying that the Pentagon did plan to withdraw all American forces and diplomats from Iraq in the time soon. That was announced pretty recently to the time that this was uploaded. So, my general takeaways from this whole thing is we need to play very carefully. I think we need to play hardball with the Iranian regime and not give concessions of any kind. We shouldn't end up with another North Korea that threatens to launch nuclear weapons every 9 months, hurting a politician's reelection efforts. And then that politician gives concessions and acts like this major negotiator that's doing these amazing things for the country, but is really only doing it so that to help his reelection odds. And we should not have a draft dodger deciding where um, millions of American troops should be. So that's the extent of the thing for today. Of course, this was a major development, probably one of the biggest developments of the past 2 years. I'll probably be covering it more in significant detail. Thanks for listening, and goodbye.